Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Got a special guest here today on the podcast. Joe McLeod is with me. Joe is a longtime friend going back to college days, many, many years ago at PBA, Palm Beach Atlantic University, that is. And Joe is a communicate. I think a communications expert. I think it's safe to say that communications consultant, director of PR, and college professor. So, welcome to the show, Joe McLeod.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. It's good to be with you. No stories from PBA, so we won't go back to
No,
reminiscing too much of that. I might be a little embarrassed, but
well,
and I don't know about the expert thing.
yeah,
That's a little much, but I do appreciate the invitation and the introduction.
you got to embrace it, man. With as many years of experience as you have, I would definitely say expert, but I appreciate the humility, man. And no stories, don't worry.
All
We'll,
right.
we'll keep it safe. But Joe and I talked a while back. It's been a little over, I think, a month now. Joe actually asked me to guest speak, which I was, of course, honored um, to guest speak in a class he's teaching right now on podcasting. This is a college class on podcasting, which I think is awesome. And so we did that. It went well. I think I was his second choice. I think like Ed Milet wasn't available that night. Isn't that
That's
what it
right.
was?
I called Joe Rogan, Ed Milet, and
And
Sean
then
Ryan, and none of them were
they were,
available. Theo Vaughn, and none.
and
But you were, I mean, you were right up there with them. So
yeah.
that
Well,
was. I appreciate you saying yes.
yeah, I had to really think about it. I had to check my calendar. No, we had a really good time, and from that, we talked some more. I said, "Hey, I'd love to have you come on just to talk a little bit about communication and and again glean on some things you've learned in your many years in communication. Then also talk to this idea of maybe how do we communicate? I think in a maybe I say a healthier way in our culture. You have this talk that goes back a few years from a TEDx talk where you were talking about this idea of are you trying to make a point or make a difference? So I was really interested in that. Said, hey, why don't we revisit that? And here we are, just a couple weeks after an election
Mm.
that has just happened here in November 2024. So I thought timing was good. We won't get too political, but more again, just this idea of communication interpersonally and whether it's on social media. So we'll get to that. But I thought just maybe for a little background, and we could start here. What drew you to communication? Because obviously that goes back
Yeah.
to college. And I don't know if it was just like, hey, I got to pick a major, so I'm going to pick communication, or was it, man, like there was just something about communication that really, really drew you?
So ironically, what drew me to communication was the power of words. And I'll explain, there's a story behind it. So I started out as a business major in college. That I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to do, but I knew business was kind of all encompassing, and there's a lot you could do with a business degree. And so I started on that track. And part of like when I started, you have to take all your gen ed courses. And I took a course in, I think it was called oral communications. It was like the basic communications that everybody takes regardless of their major. And I really enjoyed the class. I had a great professor. I enjoyed the assignments. We had a few speeches that were part of the class, and I enjoyed public speaking. I'm one of those weirdos that actually, likes it, even though I'm more of an introvert. It just, I can't really explain that. But at the end of the semester, the professor came up to me and she said, "Have you thought about going into this field?" And I was so naive at the time. I really didn't understand what the communications field was. I mean, I saw people on the news and broadcasters, but I didn't really understand what that involved. But I knew that I enjoyed that class, and I had somebody say something, affirm something that I really didn't even see in myself. And so the power of words. And so I started thinking about that. And as a business major, I'm taking classes like, accounting, and I had to take calculus. I don't know if you had to take calculus. You didn't have to, you didn't have to
Well,
take calculus as a business major?
well, I actually took it in high school as a dual enrollment class.
Okay, all right. So
So
you had,
maybe I was good because of
all right,
that.
you were an overachiever, or you were
Yeah.
at that level. I had not taken it. And so I started thinking, okay, do I want to? And I didn't have a great accounting professor at the time, and accounting is kind of a weird thing if you don't have the right instructor that can. So I thought about what this professor had said, and after thinking about it, I just changed my major. I said, I don't know what communication really involves. Now, this is just as the internet was coming out. Like, this is like 1998, 99. So it wasn't like you could get on and just Google like communication major and get all the information. But I knew I liked the course, and the professor pointed out something that she thought I was good at, and that was enough for me.
That was it.
That was
That,
it.
that right there. That's wow.
And as I got into it, as I started taking courses,
Yeah.
communication courses, especially when I got to the upper level courses, and I knew like, oh yeah, this is where I want to be. Like, I just loved it. I love the core. I love the study. I mean, the communications is a big field. There's uh, organizational communications, there's media, there's public relations, conflict resolution, negotiation. Like, there's so much. It's just a broad, just spectrum of disciplines under communication, and I really enjoyed it.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's a great example to your point of the power of words, I think, and how you can use those words to actually influence someone, in your case, in a very positive way that actually kind of changed your course a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting is I don't know that that professor really had any idea of how much she changed the trajectory of my life by that. And I don't, not long ago, I went back to see if I could find this professor, find her online, because I would love to follow up with her, and say, hey, where I am today is, partly because of what you said after that semester. So it is, you never know. And so it's just a reminder that you never know where your words will take people. I don't think she woke up that morning and said, I'm going to go and change somebody's life by my word. I think she was just being genuine, and she saw something, and she spoke into one of her students, words of affirmation. And so that tells me to just to, um, as a not just as a teacher myself, but just as somebody that's interacting with people on a regular basis, that when you see things in people, don't be afraid to say, "Hey, I noticed this. Like, you're really good at this. Consider this," because you just don't know where those words will take people.
So true. I was thinking as you were saying that and wondering if you had a conversation with that professor or followed up. So that's interesting that you were thinking the same thing of, hey, I'd love to track them down.
Yeah, I'm still trying to do that. I'm still without legally, I'm trying to find
No
this.
success.
Right. Yeah,
Wow.
and just
Usually,
so I can yeah, I just want to be able to
yeah.
hear that.
No, that's cool. I love it. I love it. I was just thinking, usually, these days, man, it's pretty easy to track people down. So this professor is in hiding. We got to find them for you.
Yeah, that's
But
that's the goal.
that's a great story though. I think on multiple levels. So okay, so that's what drew you. That got you steered in that direction. You obviously continued on and went graduate school. So really wanted to go down the path of being in communications. And to your point earlier of the different lanes you were steered more towards what? Organizational type communication?
Well, it's funny because I kind of toggled between lanes. Like
Okay.
initially, it was more kind of organizational communication. How do the leaders communicate? Um, eh, eh, but I also was very interested in mass media. I was interested in not necessarily being a journalist myself. Uh, um, I don't have the skill set to be a reporter or a journalist, but just understanding mass media, the power of language, just understanding that industry, and so moving into a career in public relations was really a natural progression for me. But at the same time, I took a lot of courses in organizational communication, leadership communicate, or crisis communication and organizational comms, just because I like that side as well.
And what would you say? What do you say you like the best? Can you say like, hey, man, this is if I could just focus on this. Is there one, or do you
I,
just like it all?
I
You
mean,
got so
I
many
like
opinions.
both, you know. It's like saying you like pizza and spaghetti. Like I like them
Okay.
both, you know. I
Okay.
really do. I love talking about media. I mean, I can nerd out and talking
Mhm.
about. I mean, in today's society, everybody has an opinion on quote the media,
Yeah.
but I could talk about that a lot and really I enjoy. I taught a class several years ago called the history and philosophy of American media and talking about
Mm,
really the progression of media since the
mm.
Revolutionary War, which is fascinating.
Wow.
We think, the media is so
Yeah.
biased today, but if you go back to the days of Washington and Adams and Jefferson, I hate to tell you, but it was bias and there was, conflict and you had reporters fighting each other in the street. I mean, it was
Wow.
wild. So I love media, but like you, Jeremy, I love leadership, and I think about a lot. How as leaders do we communicate just with our teams? Whether you're leading a small team or you're leading a large, complex, multi-leveled organization. And so I really do enjoy both aspects of communication.
I can totally relate because it's I like a lot of different lanes too, and so I could see where you'd be drawn to both. And I know you've written a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
you've done op-eds, um, podcasting yourself. I mean, so I could see the mass media draw for you. So it totally makes sense. I'm interested in the history that you alluded to there. That sounds like a whole separate topic, but that is I think that's an interesting point to draw out because a lot of times we contextualize everything to now,
Right.
like, and we just think like, oh, it used to be better, but we don't really
Mhm.
know. We've not really studied, if
Yeah.
we've not looked into, researched, and it's just easy to make these kind of like absolute statements. It's worse now than it's ever been, but I don't know. I mean, you've got more insight than me on that. I mean, any any parallels or things you could draw out there, thinking about how it is today, how divisive it's gotten, and thinking back to how it used to be. I know the reporters in the street thing's pretty wild,
Yeah.
but
Um,
any other just insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that we are in interesting times today because of social media. For the ability to get information around the world is
Yeah.
we've never seen a time like this. But the human dynamic, the human aspect is the same. And fake news is not a new thing. There's propaganda that goes way back in history, and it can go back into the battlefields, and you can look at the Civil War and Revolutionary War, and civilizations before to where there's fake news. So there's what we're seeing today that seems like it's like you say, people would say it's worse than it's ever been. Well, it's more pervasive than it's ever been because of social media. But the dynamics, those human elements are still there, and they always have been. I mean, now like Fox News and MSNBC are kind of the two, but we had Joseph Pulitzer, and William Randolph Hearst that were competing. Just so there's um, uh, you had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. They had their own publications that they funded, back during, and so they were like funded by the political parties, and so that would be like the Republicans funding their own media and the Democrats funding their own media. Like we throw a big fit over that, but that's what happened back in the times of the founding of the country. And so again, I don't want to go into a history lesson, but the point is that in some ways it is different today, but in other ways it's not.
I think it's a great insight. I love how you explain that the human condition is really in many ways the same. The mode now, the medium is obviously unlike anything we've ever seen. So it probably makes it feel like you say, more pervasive, and it is, but just makes it feel different, makes it feel, like you say, worse than it's ever been. But I think the whole point in that is, man, be curious, be a student. A lot of things we communicate about today, we do so in a way sometimes from a position of lacking knowledge,
Right.
lacking context, and it's high on emotion, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know I wanted to get to that talk you gave, and I know you're really going to hit on that. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But I wanted to jump back. You mentioned leadership. You talked about organizational communication. Could you identify maybe with your years of experience and working in various organizational settings and even in consulting, uh, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen when it comes to organizational communication? Maybe some of the things that you see where organizations have not gotten it right in relation to communication, or even just on a leadership level where, man, leaders are not doing this well in relation to communication. Anything really jump out at you is like, hey, these are some areas where, again, just haven't gotten it right. We could get better. And it could just be anecdotal. It doesn't have to be from a specific place you've worked. It could just be just in
Pulling
your,
it from me.
again,
Yeah.
being a student, being in that industry, you're more probably aware of some of those big challenges.
Yeah, there's a quote that I say a lot when I'm working with companies and when I'm doing presentations on communications, and it's the problem with communication is the illusion it has occurred.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of us, like the kind of overarching problems that we have with communication, especially as it relates to within organizations and leaderships, is we thought we had. We thought well, I said it. I put out an email, Jeremy. I sent ten emails on this, right? And so it's this idea that we think, okay, well, I said it and I know what I meant, and you should know what I meant. And so there's this illusion that because delivered a message in a way that made sense to me, it's going to make sense to you, and you're going to interpret it the same way.
Hmm.
And we do that in every area of life, not just within organizations. I mean, think about within just your friends and your family. I mean, how many times have you said something and somebody took it the wrong way? Um, or how many times have somebody said something to you and you took it the wrong way? See, we've all done this. And so I always try to set the stage with, okay, to be better communicators, we have to first understand that it's easy to misunderstand and be misunderstood. And we have to start from a kind of that platform of humility. And and so that's I would say that's really the big kind of the centerpiece of the problems that we face in communication. It's just we just assume, well, I did it. And in organizations now we struggle. Right now, one of the things is we have so many options, right? We have text, we have email, we have our whatever our inner office communication or project management programs that we used, Slack, Asana, Teams, Zoom. And so there's this um, kind of flood of communication that can be too much. And
Mm.
the saying for a long time has been, you can't over communicate. Well, that you can over you can you can flood the channels to the extent that people tune out. And so it's not about communicating more, it's about communicating better. And so I see that a lot and I see it in myself. And so that's what I encourage when I'm speaking to different organizations, when I'm doing workshops, or when I'm writing on this issue. That's the approach that I'm taking. And then you can look at certain tactics and how to better do that, how to you structure your communication. There's certainly ways that you can make that better, but it starts with the understanding of, hey, I'm going to be misunderstood and I'm going to misunderstand, and I need to do what I can do to mitigate those two things.
With what you just said, which 100% agree, and I love that idea of the illusion that we think we've communicated. I think is a great reminder. Just because you've shared information in some capacity doesn't mean you've communicated well or clearly. Are there some steps to take to get better, or things you've seen great communicators do that helps to mitigate the issue with not communicating clearly?
Yeah, one of the things that I try to do personally and I instruct others to do is when you're messaging, first of all, it depends on there's a lot that you have to take into account. It depends on the type of message that you're trying to send. How sensitive is it? What are the dynamics, surrounding it? Is it something, is it layered? But I'm always thinking, how can this message be misunderstood?
Mm.
Um, so if I say, Jeremy, did you get that report yesterday? Are you going to know exactly what I'm talking about? Or, were there, six reports that you were sent yesterday? So I would say, hey, Jeremy, did you get that report that I sent you yesterday on the financial projections or something very specific? So how might this message be misunderstood? Um, we see this a lot in text messaging. So when we live in our society today, a lot of text, email, internal messaging that we're writing out. A lot of times messages are misunderstood because we don't have tone of voice. So when you ask or when you tell somebody something, you give instructions or you're sending out a message and they respond, okay. Well, well, how'd they say it? Like, was it like, okay, or okay,
Or what about just K?
pay, right?
Oh,
So what what does
yeah.
that mean? And so again, you don't have that tone, and people are gonna often take it in a way that you may not have meant it. And so kind of a rule of thumb
Mm.
is the more removed you are from person to person, the clearer you need to be in written form to make sure that you're not understood. Emojis are actually a good thing because emojis, even like if you say something with a smiley face or laughing when crying, which usually nobody really is laughing and crying when they put that emoji up, but it can give that tone um, of the message to where it's not just up to the person to interpret it based on your words. But when you're face to face, you have nonverbals, you have body language, you have tone of voice, you have eye contact, you have a lot of communication is nonverbal. But in our society today, we message each other in ways that remove the nonverbal components. And you have to account for that. And if you don't, then again, their misunderstandings are going to happen.
So true. I'm thinking as you're saying that, just of scenarios where I've either been on the receiving end or have been the sender of the message.
Yeah.
And I really like what you said. how could this message be misunderstood? And so that, having that lens, if I'm the sender, just going back to even you said earlier, humility, and it's just this idea I think of self evaluation,
Right.
a little bit of reflection. I think the greatest leaders do that, right? They're always looking at, hey, how can I get better? Where might I be deficient? And so in this scenario of just being specifically talking about communication, just even asking that question, man, that's powerful because I can think back on a few times maybe where I sent what I thought was a clear message. And it was probably through email because I needed to let a lot of people know something. It
Hmm.
was organizational in nature.
Right.
And I can remember a couple scenarios where, again, I thought it was clear. I thought I was even a little bit transparent in the messaging, just kind of sharing some of my insight and even thoughts of where maybe, I could have gotten something wrong or done something better in relation to the message that was being shared. And I remember getting a little bit of a little bit of criticism from that message that surprised me.
Hmm.
And I thought, wow, how did they hear that?
Mm.
Hear,
Yeah, yeah.
not not actually hear it, but hear it from reading it. And not only that, I remember this. See what you think about this. Sending one of these messages again, not thinking that this was an issue, but sending it on a Friday afternoon,
Mm.
and I received the feedback that I shouldn't have done that.
Mm.
Have you ever heard anything like the timing?
Yeah.
Like in other words, they were like, "Why would you send?" Because it was again remembering this scenario I'm thinking of. It wasn't negative. It was sharing some news that maybe could have been taken a little bit like, "Hey guys, we're not doing well in this particular area in this organizational
Yeah.
context." And a Friday afternoon, why would you send that on a Friday afternoon? I was like, that never even crossed my mind. I'm just sending this message out.
Right.
But what do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it may have been better than sending it on a Monday morning,
That's what
like,
I thought. But I guess I ruined their weekend. I was like,
right,
oh my God,
right.
I can't win for losing.
I know. Yeah. Well, and I say this too, communication academically is pretty easy to understand. That's one of the reasons I chose it as a major. It's not that hard. Um, but it's complicated in
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
It's not always easy. It's not, there's not one right way to do things all the time. And that message that you typed out, that you may have been crystal clear,
Yeah.
but you just don't know how people are receiving it. So hindsight's always 2020. And I mean, you may go back and tweak some things, but it may have been the perfect message. But yeah, timing matters. I mean, you
Yeah.
certainly would want to think, okay, when is this person going to get this? Is it going to be, going to a weekend? Um, will this be a message that I can follow up with really quick? And just kind of, just some best practices are like if it is a message like that, you want to have a feedback loop. You want to be able to, so that way, if what I said wasn't received the way that I intended, I want to have a way to know that. And so if I just type out a message, press send, and just go on about my day and don't have any type of interaction or feedback, I'm I'm missing how that landed. And usually communication is not a one and done deal, it's a conversation. So it may require follow up, it may require more um, specific information, it may require additional conversations that have to be had in different forms. So a lot of times an email may work well paired with a meeting or a conversation or a phone call. It's not always a standalone thing. So what I would say to that is, as leaders, is you just have to understand um, the complexity and have a system in place to where you can have that feedback loop to know if you need to switch gears and do something differently.
That's excellent. That's such a great tip. The feedback loop and inviting that. and again, having an outlet for it, because you can head off problems if you, hey, let me know if this didn't land or if it was unclear or if it caused you to feel a certain way. I think as leaders, those are all great lessons in how we can be clearer, how we can think through ahead of time. Again, I love that question. How could this be misunderstood? I think that's a great one. You could ask that in just about any scenario. And then, yeah, thinking through, oh, just sending an email and that being the thing, I feel like those days are gone. I think because we have video,
Right.
we have audio, we have Zoom
Right.
meetings, we've got email, we've obviously in person. I think in person wins all the time because you're there together, and hopefully, again, at least you can feel and interact in the nonverbal way. But I can do that right now, right? Like we're on Zoom, and
Yeah.
so we can have that. So if I just do an email, I'm running the risk of this getting sideways with somebody if
Right.
they misinterpret it.
Yeah.
So great. Those are just all great lessons and tips. If you're a leader, if you're in charge of a team, an organization, um, so much of this can be proactively dealt with so that you don't have to on the back end now do damage control. Because
Right.
that's no, I can assure you, again, having been there, that is no fun.
I know. Well, and another thing I say too is that when we communicate, you may have been perfectly clear, and so
Yeah.
listeners you may be listening to this conversation and saying, "What I was so clear. I said it like, how could I be more clear?" And maybe you were, maybe you did everything right, and the other person just didn't hear, and there's a slew of reasons why
Mm,
it could have been taken differently than what you intended. But I always say we've got to get rid of kind of the victim and villain mindset when it comes to
mm,
communication. Oh, I was very clear when I said, well, what I heard was this. Well, no, I said this. Well, that's not what I meant. Well, if you meant this, why didn't you say that? If you get into kind of that tit for tat, you've already just blown up, the conversation. But when you
yep.
say, okay, there's not a villain here in the messaging or a victim, it's like, let's figure it out. Like if I said something and it wasn't taken clearly, let me figure out a way to say it differently. Let me try to, yeah, instead of saying, well, you misunderstood me, you were wrong, you didn't say this right. And so that's another one of the kind of the foundational elements I teach when I teach communication is like, look, we all get it wrong. Um,
Mm.
and just, have some grace. And if, if I need to say it in a different way or I need to have follow-up conversations, that's okay. That's why it's called communication. It's an ongoing thing.
Indeed, it is. And imagine, I'm thinking through, you know, the world we're in, and whether it's politics or high level organizational leadership, um, you don't hear a lot of people saying, I got it wrong.
Right.
It goes back to what you said earlier about humility and
Yeah.
how hard that is for whatever reason, whether it's ego, whether it's pride, whether it's total like lacking in self awareness and always thinking
Mm,
it's someone else.
right.
But just having a leader say, "Hey, you know what? I got it wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I didn't communicate well there. I didn't articulate this like I intended." Man, that's kind of refreshing. I love that authenticity. I think we're all desiring a little bit more of that. But
Yeah.
I think bringing it back to the heart of this, it really can start with us individually and how we control what we can control and how we communicate and how we self-reflect,
Yeah.
how we approach these conversations, whether they are on this organizational level or, man, if it's just one-to-one or it's on social media, um, we have this opportunity to get better. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say you're absolutely right. And the cool thing about this is that humility, while it's good for the soul and it's a characteristic that we want in any leader, it gives you credibility.
Mm,
And credibility gives you power when it comes to persuasion. And
Mm,
as a communicator, one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to persuade, we're trying to get ideas across. And if I show humility, that enhances my credibility. And the more credibility that I have, the more power I have in persuading others. And so it's not just a feel-good thing. I mean, humility is something we all should have, but there's a benefit to it. There's a benefit not just to our soul, but to our purpose and what we're trying to achieve as leaders. And it's tremendously powerful.
mm. So true. Couldn't agree more. Well, let's touch on really staying in this line of thinking here, but touching a little bit more specific on this idea of making a point or making a difference. This was a so you gave this TED talk, TEDx,
Yeah,
TEDx Lakeland. I
FedEx
think it was
Lakeland.
about 5 years ago, or wait, is that right?
2018. Yeah,
Okay,
2018.
2018. So and for those who would like to watch it, it is still on YouTube. I found it. There he was delivering this talk.
They haven't taken it down yet. Thank you.
No, no. So it's obviously a good one. But can you talk a little bit about that topic that you came up with and what you were really trying to drive home through that message? And I know it probably aligns with some things you've already mentioned, but and I know you talk about social media and how we are, and again, we're in a divisive time, and um, you are able to interact with people in a way that we've never been able to in various platforms, various settings, and you
Right.
have the ability to make a decision on how you will interact, how you will react to things that you see that come across your screen on a daily basis. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah. So this was, I started thinking about this around the 2016 election, and that's when
Mm-hmm.
we saw social media. I mean, social media was on the scene in the 2008 election,
Yeah.
but really exploded and was a key player. In fact, you could argue the primary player in the 2016 election. And just like as you see in any election cycle, you get a lot of opinions, but now it's not just listening to the news talking heads. Everybody who has a Facebook account, or at the time it was Twitter before it was X,
Yeah.
um, Instagram, but mainly Facebook and Twitter, were able to go and just um, say whatever they wanted to about politics, about political issues, about what they thought was wrong with the world, and who was responsible for what was wrong with the world. And I started, thinking about how people were communicating, and it was interesting because it was like when we get into these controversial issues, it's almost like we abandon everything we know about persuasion and communication, and it just gets to be just kind of a venting match, who's louder, who's nastier, who's meaner. Um, and I just asked the question kind of to myself. I said, when we get on here and we talk about these political and social issues that are divisive, and we put our opinion out there, are we trying to make a point or make a difference? And it, maybe we can't do both.
Hmm.
Like, like, am I just trying to get what I want to say across and just kind of stick it to that person? Or do I want to really try to change hearts and minds and present an idea and make a case for it, and let it be tested and let it be challenged and be okay with that? And so I wrote an article for the Orlando Sentinel, just something to that effect. And then turned it into a TEDx talk. And really that the theme is just that. Like, why are
Mhm.
we doing what we're doing? Like, why are we, like, what's our objective here? And so when you go on social media to fire off an opinion about an issue, like, what's your objective? Like, are you trying to change the world? Are you trying to change somebody's mind, or are you trying to feel better about yourself? Because there is something therapeutic about getting it off your chest, right? So that's legitimate, but it's not always effective at changing somebody's mind or being persuasive. And so that's what I was exploring with that question. What are we trying to do? Make a point or make a difference?
Yeah, and you hit on a couple things in there. Um, and I was totally relating when you were talking about, like you see something, like say you see a comment or somebody share an article and they, it's on maybe it's on an issue or if it's political in nature, it's on a certain side of the aisle, right? And you reading like, oh my gosh, that's garbage, they're wrong. And so I know I'll be in that position. I'll read it and then I'll think of all the things I want to say.
Yeah,
And I'll think, and I think you talked a little bit about this, is like, I want to, say something like let them know how wrong they are. And I want to share it and show, my supposed authority on this. And I want all these other people to get on there and agree with me, right? Just, I don't know, like make me feel better because it's like I'm angry and I know all these other
right.
people are angry too. And I'm gonna go out there and show them. But to what end? To your point, it's like it's just to make a point. It's to have this outlet again that it's very emotional. Like it's
Yeah,
rooted in emotion. I will say years ago, probably back in that 16 time frame, or maybe a little bit before, I was probably more into politics and I would share a lot of stuff, right? And I would try to make comments. I remember, being much more active. And I think I'm at the point now where I'm like, um, I don't have the energy for it. And I also don't see the value in me just going on there and ranting about something just to do it. Right.
right.
Now, do I really want to roll up my sleeves and have a more constructive conversation around an issue and being willing to engage in the back and forth? And sometimes I'm like, I don't even know if I want to do that because usually it just descends into whether
Mhm.
it's, name calling or just strong disagreements and I kind of just like I don't know if I have the energy for it and I
Right.
so I usually just kind of just stay out of it anymore where
Right.
years ago I might wanted to jump into it more, but all that to say I think it was to just make a point
Yeah.
because am I really going to change their mind?
Hmm.
Probably not. Oh, I'm going to get on there and share this thing and then this person who's like staunchly on an issue, they're not just going to go, "Oh, Jeremy, yeah, that's a great point. You're right. You know what? I agree with you now."
I was wrong.
It's
Yeah.
probably
I
not
was
going to
wrong.
happen.
Yeah.
So, I guess all that to say, the 2 points you really talked about, you talked about like finding a common place.
Yeah.
And so that's the first one. We'll talk about that and then we'll get to the second. But do you think you can get there in this, in our divisive culture? Can we get to a common place or is it just, hey, let's agree to disagree? And maybe that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in certain cases you can get to a common place, but I want to go back to what you were saying about, responding on social media because I think the first question we have to ask ourselves is this the right place for this
Hmm.
conversation? And is it with the right people? So if it's, somebody, some unnamed X account, that's posting things and you don't even know who's behind it. You don't even, I mean, maybe it's a bot or a troll. It's probably not even worth
Yeah.
putting out there. Like it's probably not even worth responding. It's probably not even worth, but if it's somebody that or if it's like a legitimate forum to where people are open to
Hmm.
debate and questioning and kind of wrestling with ideas, and yes, then get in and that's because we want that. Like we want that's how good ideas are um, are worked out is we debate them. You kind of put the idea out there, you test it, and so we want for a society, for a healthy, free society, we want to be able to have constructive debates. So the question is this the right place? Is the right forum? So
Hmm.
I don't want to discourage anybody from debating or putting an idea out there and If it gets criticized, it gets criticized. That there's certainly a place for that. But yeah, it really depends. It depends on
Mm.
where and how we're doing it. But going back to your question about commonplace, it is like to be able to get into a position of influence and persuasion, it is essential that you're able to connect with people and relate. It's showing empathy. It's understanding where people are coming from. Politicians, as much as we say we don't like politicians, as much as we criticize them, we elect them and then we criticize them. Most politicians are good at channeling people's emotions, their fears, their anxiety, and feeding that back to them. They display empathy in the fact that they're understanding what people feel and where they're coming from. And if you can make that connection with people, you put yourself in a much better spot to wield influence. Now, just like anything that can be used for good or bad, right? You can influence people to do, amazing things and do things that are better for humankind, or you can influence, motivate people for destruction and horrible things. So it's a power that can be used for good and evil. But with that comes judgment. Like, is this the best place for it? Are the people on the other side of it receptive to hearing
Mm.
a message? And if they're not, it may not be the audience that you need to engage.
Yeah, those are great points. And I was just thinking, you want to put your idea out there or a thought, and it can be a vulnerable spot. Like, say you're
Yeah.
coming at it from a really good
Right.
part. Hey, I have this thing I want to share. I'm going to do it in a very respectful way, but very principled. Like, hey, this is what I believe, and maybe it's not an issue, but you're opening yourself up now to the criticism,
Right.
to someone
Yep.
not reciprocating that. And I think maybe that's where it can get challenging. Sometimes we say, you know what, I'm just going to stay out of this, and I'm not going to debate. I'm not going to engage because I just don't even want to deal with the negativity that might come my way.
Right. Yeah, and that's a fair point. And we don't like criticism. And even if you have 100 responses of affirmation and people agreeing with what you're saying, that one bit of criticism will kind of negate, all of the
Mm.
positive statements. And so, yeah, that certainly is part of it. And look, it's okay to defend yourself. It's okay to say, no, this is what I meant, and it's okay to argue. But again, it goes back to are we spinning our wheels? Are we arguing with somebody that's really not, or a group that really has no interest in hearing what we're saying? Then it just the conditions aren't right.
Yeah,
But we always, again, you do want to try to start from a position of commonplace, and then work from there. So if let's say we're talking about um, better schools. What is, we may have different opinions on how do we make our schools better and how do we fund those schools and what do they look like and do they have PE or not? But if we start there about the specifics, about the policies, then we're probably not going to get very far. But if we start with the values that, hey, we care about our kids. We want what's best for our kids. We want our kids to be in safe schools and healthy schools and schools that are going to help them flourish and grow. And I think everybody can agree on that. So if we start there and work from that commonplace, then we can negotiate and deal with our differences in a little more constructive way.
excellent. Love it. So that was the first thing, commonplace. And the second thing you really talked about was this idea of conveying your ideas with constraint.
Yeah. Yeah. This is hard, especially if you are emotional about an issue, if you're passionate about something and you just want to, um, you just want to just pour out your ideas and just, but a lot of times, and this is just kind of a life lesson that most of us, I know I speak for myself, have learned the hard way. if you react with emotion, it likely will not go the way you want it to go.
Hmm.
Now, again, there are caveats to this. There are times where you want that emotion to be shown. There are certainly those times. But as a general rule, if you're angry and you are speaking with the person with whom, um, if you're speaking to the one
Hmm.
that has made you angry, then what you're going to say is you're probably going to say something you regret, or you're probably going to say something that's not going to solve the problem. It's just going to it's going to strain the relationship and make the problem worse. And so communicating with restraint is the idea of, hey, look, I need to take a deep breath and I need to make sure that what I say is done um, from a position of wisdom and going back to humility and not just flying off the handle with my emotion. There's a story that I used in that TEDx talk of Abraham Lincoln, one of my favorite Lincoln stories.
Hmm.
This was after the Battle of Gettysburg. We all know the Gettysburg Address, we're familiar with it. But one thing we may not know is that after that battle, Lincoln was furious. He was really upset with the commanding general of the Union Army at the time was General George Meade, and Lincoln wrote him a letter. Lincoln was hot, and Lincoln excoriated General Meade because after that battle, Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, was not captured, and Lincoln thought he should have been captured. And if had that had happened, the war would likely would have ended, but that didn't happen, and it was Meade's fault. And because of that failure in Lincoln's eyes, the war was going to continue, and more people were going to be killed. So Lincoln writes this letter excoriating Meade. But the neat thing about it is Lincoln never sent it. And that was on purpose. He purposefully did not send it to Meade. And historians looked at that letter and they concluded that they believed that Lincoln did that on purpose because he
Hmm.
didn't want his leading general to be demoralized. He needed him to have high morale and be ready for the next fight and ready for the next battle. He didn't need a tongue lashing. And so Lincoln was able to kind of get it off his chest in that letter, but realized that that's not what Meade needed to hear.
Hmm.
And he made that decision that his communication from Meade from that point forward would be with restraint. And that's not saying we don't confront people. That's not saying we don't have hard conversations, but it means we have to check our emotions and ask, okay, is this going to make the situation better or worse? And then go from there.
I think that's another great history lesson, you've pulled out here. And just going back to what we were talking about earlier, talking about history and being a student and learning. And I think there's so much value in that. But it does highlight this well. And man, I think if we as we bring this to a close, just like whether it's organizational communication, it's one to one, it's social media. Um, I think it gets better if we start again from a place of some self-reflection, some
Yeah.
some questions of like you say, how could this message be potentially misunderstood? Am I approaching this from a place of humility? Am I trying to make a point or make a difference? Like those are some great, I think, filters. If we, I'm just thinking through this, like if we all did that a little bit in all of our communications, I imagine that it would get better. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And at in multiple areas of our
Mm,
lives. I mean, this certainly applies to leadership, civic engagement, but even with your families. I mean, think about your children.
mhm.
I mean, as a dad of three kids, I mean, there are things there are times when I will say something. It's like, you know what? I didn't need to say that. I shouldn't have said that, and I should, because that wasn't constructive. That wasn't helpful. When the the kid comes in and you're telling them everything that they did wrong, that's not, yeah, you may make a point, But your child's likely not going to turn around and say, okay, well, I'm going to fix every one of those things that you just pointed out because you pointed it out, Dad. No, that's not. So a lot of times it's biting your tongue. It's saying, hey, this is kind of what I want to say, but I need to communicate it a little bit differently because really the result I want is because if we get to try to where we're trying to manipulate behavior, that's not healthy and that's not sustainable. We want to influence the right way. And so the influence that I want to have on my children, if I want to have influence on my children, I've got to mind my tongue. I got to be careful with what I'm saying because as we started off the conversation with the story about my professor, words have power. And just like fire, I mean, fire can heat up your house or it can burn it down. And, so our words are the same way. So whether it's in business, whether it's with your friends or your family, raising children, your parents, organizations, civic engagement, whatever it is, the rules apply.
Mm.
We just have to be wise and judicious in how we're going to communicate
Mm.
in these different areas.
Well said. Um, no, I was just thinking as you were talking, and as we again just wrap this up, and I think it all ties together well. Communication obviously is a two-way street, as we say. And
Yeah,
so that could be one to one, it could be one to many, it could be on social, it could be in the email I send at work to a group. But man, if we do a really good job on our side, again, that self-reflection, what are my motivations here? Am I approaching this from a place of humility, positive intentions, trying to communicate as clear as I can? We can do all those things, but guess what? There still might be someone who receives it the wrong way.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you know what? I think as I'm just processing this out loud, I'm thinking again, maybe just myself and in situations that I've found myself in over the years where I thought I did all the right things, it still wasn't received well. Man, I can't necessarily control that, right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Yes.
maybe I just need to be okay with that. If I've
Yes.
done all this self-reflection and man, I've exhausted everything on my end, well, it might actually still not be received properly by someone else. And that's maybe on them.
That's right. Well, it is. It takes two to tango, and it may not be received the way that you intended. And in those cases, usually there are ways to, again, if you have that
Yeah.
feedback loop, you can try to
Yeah.
address that to the best of your ability, but
Right.
it's ultimately on them. But here's another thing. What you really can't control is whether they accept it or reject it.
Yes.
Because they may hear you and they may reject what you're saying, and they have every right to do that. That you can't control,
Yeah.
but you can still be clear and communicate in the most um, just transparent way and humble way that
Yeah.
you know how. Have those feedback loops in place, and if they reject it, they don't accept the message, or that's okay. But you've done everything within your control,
Mhm.
and that's ultimately
Yeah.
all we can do.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said it that way because you're right. It's more of an acceptance or rejection in many cases. And I think the point I was trying to get to there is if we really are this self-reflective person, a leader that wants to, communicate well and has positive intentions and tries, want to get our message across in a way that's positive and edifying, um, and it is rejected, then sometimes we've like, oh man, I messed up, I got to fix this, and it's like, no, you know what, man, maybe I just need to be okay
Right.
with they didn't accept it or they criticized it and not take all that on because
Yes.
that can happen too. Um,
Right.
just a
It's
thought as
about,
yeah.
it is. It's about
Yeah.
taking ownership,
Hmm.
but not necessarily responsibility for how somebody responds.
Yes. That's a great way to put it. See, this is why I have you here to you make it sound so much better.
Well,
Guys, listen,
I've had
listen.
time to think about this, and so much of what I say, Wasn't learned in a textbook. It's learned through experience,
Yeah.
of getting it wrong a lot and then figuring out how to make it a little bit better.
Well, you've done a phenomenal job, and appreciate you taking some time to share with us. Again, just going back to some things you said. I love the filter of just evaluation of how can my message be misunderstood potentially, and having the humility to evaluate and to receive feedback when it doesn't go well, and again, ask that question: Am I making a point or making a difference with my communication? So we'll wrap there. Any final thoughts? Any words to encourage or inspire us with as we leave, Joe?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Jeremy. This has been fun. I've enjoyed talking about this, and yeah, sorry if I went too much into the history lesson
No.
there. Those stories to me are fascinating. But yeah, and just and what we didn't touch on this specifically, but one thing I do want to mention too, that so much about the kind of going back to humility and the feedback loop, listening, being
Mm.
a listener. To be a better communicator and getting our message out means we have to be better at understanding other people and listening to other people, not just waiting for them to stop talking so it's our turn to speak, but to genuinely listen. And so I don't want to skip that part of it because that's a huge component of being a better communicator. And if we, listen better, quick to listen, slow to speak, that's going to work out better really in every area of our life.
Without a doubt, it reminds me of famous professor from PVA, Dr. Issa. Friends,
Dr.
hear,
Isa.
friends, hear and listen. He would say all the
Do both.
time, and I think it took me a little bit to figure out what is this guy saying.
Uh,
Hear and listen. What? Oh, okay. Yeah, I can hear something,
Right.
but I actually might not be listening at all. And
Absolutely.
and I think great lesson, great reminder. You're exactly right. Listening to what we are hearing, but also listening to all the other things that are going on in that communication. The nonverbals, the things that are the person is trying to articulate, but just coming at it from that place, I think could make all the difference in the world. Because again, it's a posture of humility and like, hey, I really want to listen to this person, not just try to get my point across, but really try to understand them, and in doing so, hopefully create more common ground and hopefully communicate better. So,
Yeah.
man, great stuff. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's really like a master class on communication on so many levels, man. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll do it again.
Sounds fun.